Continuing with Avery pretrial, July 2006. Next witness. Attorney Fallon, state would call its next witness Jennifer Kolbusz. Court, is somebody bringing in the next witness in? Attorney Fallon, I believe so. The court, okay. The clerk, be seated. Raise your right hand. Jennifer Kolbusz, called as witness herein, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as to the following. The clerk, please be seated. Please state your name and spell your last name for the record. The witness, Jennifer Kolbusz, Kolbusz. Direct examination by Attorney Fallon. What do you do for a living? I'm a reporter at Channel 5. And where's Channel 5 located? In Green Bay. How long have you been employed with Channel 5? It will be 2 years in September. Do you have a current assignment or detail for the type of reporting you do at this time? I'm a general assignment reporter. And have you been a general assignment reporter for the entire 2 years at Channel 5? Yes, I have. Directing your attention to November and December of the year 2005, starting first with November, did you have an opportunity to interview an individual by the name of Stephen Avery? Yes. And with respect to Mr. Avery, please tell us where that interview took place. In the Calumet County Jail. Do you recall the date of your first interview with Mr. Avery? Yes, it was November 18th. Describe for us, if you will, how that interview came to be. On the morning of November 18th, I called the Calumet County Jail from my apartment and I asked for the visiting hours were at the jail. And what information did you receive in response to that request? The woman who answered the phone told me there were specific days and times. I don't recall what she said. However, it differed from what I had heard from other reporters who I worked with. So at that point, I questioned her further. She asked if I would like to speak to a supervisor. All right, and did you in fact speak to a supervisor? Yes, I did. She transferred me to John Burns. And before we get into that, my question would be, did you identify yourself as a news reporter during your first conversation with the woman? Yes, I did. All right, and did you indicate the reason for your inquiry? Yes. All right, and to the best you can recall, what did you tell the person who answered the phone in terms of the reason for your inquiring as to the visiting hours? I said I would like to do an interview with Stephen Avery in the jail. All right. Subsequent to this woman answering the phone, you indicated you spoke with one of the supervisors. I'm sorry. You did speak to a supervisor. After I talked to that woman. All right. And with whom did you speak? John Burns. And what did you ask of Mr. Burns? Well, again, I told him I'm a reporter and that I wanted to see if I could do an interview with Stephen Avery and asked how I could go about doing that. All right, and what instructions were you given? He said I could mail a letter to Stephen Avery. That was one option. All right, any other options? Yes, I in fact said, well, I was trying to see if I could interview him that day. And he said I could write a letter and hand deliver it to the jail. Just ask for John Burns when I got there. And he would hand deliver the letter to Stephen Avery. All right, and did you in fact hand deliver such a letter? Yes, I did. At this particular point, do you know if that letter still exists? I don't. Did that letter you wrote ever come back to you? No. All right. Tell us what happened specifically when you arrived at the sheriff's department that day. We went to the jail, the photographer I was working with, and I asked to speak to John Burns. John Burns then came out to the area where we were, and I introduced myself, and I gave him the letter that I had handwritten in the car ride over to the jail. All right, and as best as you can recall now, can you tell us the contents of that letter? Yes, I identified myself as Jennifer Kolbusz, who works for Channel 5, and said that I would like to do an interview with him. And I said that I had no intention of convicting him on television, or I had no agenda, but rather I just wanted to hear his side of the story. All right, and when you came to the sheriff's department, to whom did you give the letter? John Burns. And when you handed him that letter, that occurred? What occurred? He looked it over, but at the same time, he also turned his back and started walking back into the jail. And my understanding is that he delivered it to Stephen Avery. All right, and what led you to believe that it was actually delivered to Mr. Avery? He said he was going to deliver it to him, and then also a few minutes later, another member of the jail staff opened the door and said that Stephen Avery had agreed to let us in. All right, what occurred then? That jail staff member took our identification and had us sign in, and they were led into a room, and Stephen Avery was let in a few minutes later. All right, could you describe first and foremost the room in which you were sent to? It was located just right there from the door that I initially entered. It wasn't far into the jail at all. And it was just a plain room with a small table, a small plain room. And there were some windows on the doors so I could see the guards through those both sides. I believe as we were talking to Stephen. All right. And how many doors were in the room? Two. And these windows, were they only windows in the room? I believe there were other windows. I'm not positive. All right. Who accompanied you into this room? The photographer I work with. Did any member of the sheriff's department actually walk into the room with you? I don't remember. Was there any conversation with either Mr. Burns or a person who opened the security door for you regarding Mr. Avery? They said he would be in shackles, and that was it. All right. Prior to commencing the interview with Mr. Avery, did you have any discussions whatsoever with Mr. Burns as to the nature and content of your interview with Mr. Avery? No. Did Mr. Burns or any other member of the sheriff's department put any restrictions on the topics that were to be covered in the interview? No. Were you suggested, excuse me, let's rephrase that. Were any questions suggested to you that should be asked of Mr. Avery? No. In terms of the interview, describe for us, if you will, Mr. Avery's appearance when he came into the room. When he came into the room, he had shackles around his ankles and he was handcuffed. All right. And he had, I believe, recently a haircut, and he was just simply came to the room and sat down. All right. Describe his demeanor for us, if you will. I would say he was pleasant. I would just say fairly natural. All right. Well, would you say he was excited, relaxed, cordial, angry? How would you describe him? I would describe him as relaxed. All right. When he came into the room, did any of the sheriff's department personnel remain in the room with you and your cameraman and Mr. Avery? No. All right. As best as you can recall, what were the first words spoken upon his arrival in the room by you? What did I say first? What did you say first? I said, thank you for speaking with us. And what response, if any, did you receive from him? You're welcome. All right. At any point at the beginning here, did he suggest to you that he did not wish to be interviewed? No. At any point, did he tell you that he had told members of the sheriff's department that he did not want to have the media interviews? No. At this particular point, did you then tell him what you wanted to do in terms of the interview? Yes. All right, as best as you can recall, tell us what you told him as to what your plan was for the interview. I said, I just wanted to hear his side of the story. All right, and how did he respond to that comment? He just said, okay, and then as I proceeded to ask questions, he answered them. All right. At what point, if you recall, was the camera turned on, as it were, for the purposes of recording of this interview? Probably within a minute of Stephen Avery taking a seat. All right. And is a camera which was utilized by your cameraman, is there a light on that camera that would suggest to someone observing that the camera was off recording? Yes. All right. During the course of the interview, did you indicate to Mr. Avery, if you can recall, whether the content of the interview might actually be broadcast to the public at large? I never said that specifically, but my understanding was that it was implied. All right. And just so we're quite clear, what was it about the circumstances that led you to conclude that he was aware that it could be very well broadcast. Well, I identified myself as a reporter for Channel 5, and I entered the room with a photographer. All right. During the entire interview with Mr. Avery, at any point, did any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department come into the room? No. At any point during the course of the interview, did Mr. Avery indicate to you that he did not wish to be interviewed any longer? In other words, he didn't want to answer any more of your questions? No. At any point during the course of the interview, did he indicate to you that he didn't want to interview publicly, aired or broadcast during the course of the interview? No. Tell us how, as best is your best estimate of how long this interview lasted. I would say probably about a half an hour. How did the interview terminate? I would say that it ended on cordial terms. All right. Did you make any request to Mr. Avery at the conclusion of the interview that you can recall at this time? I said chances are that I would try to contact him again and do another interview. Okay. How did he respond to that? He said, okay. All right. Did he make any request of you or your cameraman relative to the interview process at the conclusion of the interview? No. How did you let members of the Sheriff's Department know that the interview was concluded? We stood up, and I'm assuming that they just knew at that point we were done because we were collecting our equipment. All right. And as you were doing that, did the deputies enter the room, or did you open the door and ask them to come in? They opened the door, and they escorted Stephen Avery out one door, and we were let out the other door. Who left the room first, Mr. Avery or you and your cameraman? I believe Mr. Avery did, but I'm not sure. All right. Did you have any additional discussion that you recall at this time with the deputy sheriff who escorted you from the room back to the general public waiting area? No. During the course of that, I think you said that it was a brief walk. Did you have any encounters with Mr. Burns? No. Upon leaving the secure area of the jail and going to the general reception area, did you have any additional discussions with Mr. Burns at that time? No. Did you have any discussion with any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department regarding the nature and content of the interview you had just conducted with Mr. Avery? No. Were there any requests made for copies of the video or audio parts of that interview? No. All right. I believe that you have indicated there was a second interview that occurred with Mr. Avery. Yes. Your best recollection, approximately when did that second interview take place? On December 14th. Tell us how that interview came to pass. That interview, I had not contacted the jail that morning. I had said in our afternoon news meeting that I would like to try talking to Stephen Avery again, and our staff agreed that I should try. And my photographer and I, again, the same photographer, just drove to the Calumet County Jail. And once again, I handwrote a letter, and when I got to the jail, I asked for John Burns, and he came out. And once again, took that letter back to Stephen Avery. Okay, and again, to your best recollection, well, first of all, let me ask you, did you ever see the letter again? No. All right, your best recollection, could you tell us what you put in the letter this time for the December 14th interview? Yes, I said my name is Jennifer Kolbusz. We talked about a month ago. And there have been some recent developments in the case, and I would just like an opportunity to try to talk to you again about those developments, and once again, give you an opportunity to share your side of the story. All right? When you encountered Mr. Burns this time, were there any additional discussions between you and him, or did you simply just present the letter to him? I just gave him the letter. All right. And what response, if any, did you receive from him? None. He just looked it over once again and turned and walked into the jail. Approximately how long or how much time passed before you saw him again, Mr. Burns? I don't believe I did see him again. The next person I saw was a different member of the staff. All right. And do you recall who that may have been? No. All right. Male or female? Male. All right. And what Well, what happened when they appeared? They opened the door and said that Stephen Avery agreed to let us in. All right. And this time, this same door that you entered in the November 18th? Yes. When the door opened and the person escorted you through the door, where did you go? Once again, we were asked to give our IDs and we signed in, and they were led into the same room we were in a month before. All right. And when you arrived in that particular room, was Mr. Avery already there or did he come in later? He came in later. When Mr. Avery came in, how did he appear this particular date, December 14th? I know this time his hands were not in cuffs, and he seemed actually to be in quite a good mood. He was smiling and extended his hand and said, "Good to see you," and we shook hands. Did he greet the photographer as well, or just you? I don't remember. All right. After the greeting, or excuse that, while the greeting was occurring, were members of the sheriff's department present, or had they left the room? They had left the room. So at this particular time, there were only the three of you in the room. Yes. All right. After greetings were exchanged, tell us what occurred next, or how you began. I don't remember the exact content of the conversation, but I know I started with more or less small talk, and I asked him if he had been following the news, reading the newspapers, and he said somewhat. I did say to him, "You seem like you're in a good mood," because he was smiling. All right. And how did he respond to your comment? He just kind of shook his smile off, and I would say he got fairly serious at that point. All right. And at this particular point, did he express to you any unwillingness to participate in another on-camera interview? No. At any point, did he alert you or tell you that he had declined other news media's interview request? No. As you proceeded during the course of the interview, at any time, was there any indication from Mr. Avery that he just did not want to participate in the interview with you? No. At any point during the course of the interview, did he refuse to answer any of your questions? No. At any point in the interview, did he appear confused as to the nature or purpose of the interview? No. Were his responses to the questions posed by you coherent? Yes. Were they actually in response or to the particular question that had been asked? Yes. All right. During the course of the interview, did any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department enter the room? No. Prior to the interview taking place, did any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department discuss with you the nature or content of the interview? No. Did anyone suggest to you certain questions that could or should be asked? No. Did anyone suggest to you certain areas which should not be discussed during the course of the interview? No. Would it be fair to say that you had a complete license, as it were, to conduct the interview as you saw fit as a reporter? Yes. In any way, did you feel constrained or restricted by any member of law enforcement for purposes of conducting the interview? No. Your best estimate, approximately how long did this second interview on December 14th last? About a half an hour. How would you characterize Mr. Avery's demeanor during that half an hour? Relaxed. How did the interview end? I wrapped it up once again with louder conversation. We were approaching Christmas, and I asked him if his family planned on visiting him for Christmas. All right. He also mentioned that it was almost time for them to eat dinner at the jail, and I asked him what kind of food they served. All right. So it would be fair to say that this interview occurred late afternoon. Yes. All right. How did the deputy strike that? Let me ask you this. During the course of the interview, were there members of the sheriff's department standing outside each of the doors? Yes. All right. And how did you let them know that the interview was concluded? Once again, I stood up and Stephen Avery did shake my hand again, and I just assumed that they assumed that we were finished. All right. And when you stood up, he stood up, you shook hands. Did anyone from the sheriff's department enter the room at that point? I believe at that point they opened the door. All right. And what occurred then? They escorted Stephen Avery out of the room. And then what occurred? And then my photographer and I left the other door. All right. As you proceeded out the other door, were you escorted by any member of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department? Escorted in the sense that there was somebody who opened the door for us. All right. And did they at least direct or point you the way out, or did you already know from the past experience? We already knew where we were going. It was such a short distance. We just showed ourselves out. All right. During that short distance, were you approached by any member of the Sheriff's Department regarding the nature or content of your interview? No. After the interview was completed and after you left the secure area, did you have any additional conversations with John Burns, for instance? No. Before leaving the Calumet County Sheriff's Department and jail that day, did anyone from the Sheriff's Department make any request of you with respect to obtaining copies, for instance, of the interview that you had just concluded? No. Did anyone approach you at all, for that matter, after completion of this interview before you left? No. Were you required to sign out, or did you just walk out the door and keep going? I believe we just walked out the door. All right. I don't recall though. Just a concluding question. What motivation, if any, did you have to approach Mr. Avery on both the November 18th and December 14th? I mean, what were you thinking? It's my job as a reporter. All right. Were you aware of the fact that other media interviews which may have occurred since in that time of his arrest until that time you interviewed him on November 18th, for instance? Were you aware of other media interviews? Yes. All right. And with respect to the time frame from November 18th to December 14th, were you aware of other media attempts to interview Mr. Avery? Attempts, yes. All right. And being a news reporter, is there a certain amount of competition out there, amount of reporters to get a story? Yes. All right. So that also played a factor in your attempt to obtain an interview of Mr. Avery because you would like to have gotten the story, correct? Correct. Okay. Attorney Fallon, that's all I have for this witness. I will pass the witness for cross-examination. Attorney String, were you the court? Mr. String? Attorney String, I'm sorry. Thank you. I apologize. The court, go ahead. Cross-examination by Attorney String. Were you new to Wisconsin in September 2006 when you joined WFRV? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? In September 2004, when you joined WFRV, if I understood you right, were you new to Wisconsin? Yes. Stephen Avery was a new name to you in the fall of 2005 when you first began working this story. I had heard of Stephen Avery, who Stephen Avery was, before this case ever started. What had you heard? I had heard that he was wrongly convicted of a rape and was released from prison a couple of years ago. Okay. And so when this story started, you were referring to the disappearance of Teresa Halbach. Yes. The name Stephen Avery at that point rang a bell with you. Yes. His release from prison in 2003 was not, at that point, fresh news. No. But the disappearance of Ms. Halbach was. Yes. So was Mr. Avery's possible connection to that? Yes. You were assigned to this story when, the general story, I mean, the Halbach Avery story. First time I covered this story was Saturday, the Saturday that the investigators had set up the perimeter on the Avery property. Okay, that's when you were first assigned? Yes. You went to the Avery property or to the perimeter? Correct. Were met there by law enforcement officers? There weren't any law enforcement officers right there by the media at the time, but eventually some did come out to the media to release a statement. Okay, who was that? I don't know. Okay, what I'm interested in, that's Saturday, November 5th. Mm-hmm. At least I will suggest to you that I think I'm right. Did you meet any members of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department that day? I don't even know if the person that walked out with us was a Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Fair enough. And that was the only law enforcement person with whom you had contact? Yes. You then followed the news conference? Yes. Did you attend some of the news conferences? Yes. And do you remember how many, or just that you attended some of them? Throughout the whole course of this case, I have attended two of those news conferences, that one on Saturday and then one, I don't recall the date, but an inside room. Yes. Saturday one was outdoors. There was one that was held There was one that was held in the fire department indoors that you attended. Yes, that Saturday. Yes. And the second? Yes. All right. During those two interviews, have you made the acquaintance of Sheriff Poggle? Not directly. Have you made the acquaintance of anyone else from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department? No. When you called on November 18th, 2005, to the jail, you identified yourself as a reporter to the woman who answered the phone. Yes. Said that you wanted to interview Stephen Avery. Correct. Asked about the visiting hours and the opportunity to do that. Yes. If I understood you correctly, she then gave you information that it was at odds or varied from the information you had gotten from other reporters. Yes. That is, she said that you could not come to interview Mr. Avery. She said that the visiting hours were, as she had stated, certain days for certain last names. Something like that. Mm-hmm. And certain hours. Right. And you understood that day was not a day permissible visiting under the set of rules that she was describing to you. Correct. Because of the news, the time cycle on the news, you wanted to accomplish the interview that day. Yes. Had at any point you met Calumet County District Attorney Ken Kratz by that time? No. Had seen him at the news conferences, but had not been introduced to him. Correct. All right. Did you ask for someone in specific at the jail when the woman with whom you were speaking proposed that you talk with the supervisor? No. Did you ask for, by description, I want to talk to the top person or the captain or, what did you say? Well, I never asked to speak to anyone. She said that, would you like to speak to my supervisor? And I said yes. Why was it? Well, you couldn't know that, what you had said immediately before proposing that you would want to speak to the supervisor. I said that I had heard differently what the hours for visitation, and we were just discussing that. And I think in that situation of being sort of flustered, she just said if I would like to ask to speak to the supervisor. All right. So you reply to her? Yes. Correct. You expressed some irritation or disappointment that you were not getting the answer that you were? Yes. Who told you what to expect in terms of visiting hours? A reporter at my station. Who? Olga Halaburda, Halaburda. All right. Has she been in to interview Mr. Avery in the jail herself? No. How did you ask her, how do you know the jail visiting hours down in Chilton? She said that she had called. Okay. And gave you the information, and now this woman's information didn't square with that. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? The woman's information didn't square with what Olga Halaburda had given you. Correct. How long before Mr. Burns got to the phone, roughly? A matter of seconds, as if he was somewhere was standing nearby. My understanding is that it was a phone that was transferred. Okay, but it was just a matter of transferring a phone call, just a few seconds. Yes. Did he identify himself to you? Yes. How? He said that his name's John Burns and that he's jail supervisor. You understood him to be in charge of the jail? Correct. You then repeated your request? Yes. For an interview? Yes. With Mr. Avery? Yes. You told him that you wanted to talk to Mr. Avery about the pending criminal complaint, the charges against him? Yes. You said that you wanted to do it that day? Yes. He initially told you that you would have to write a letter? Yes. But it was he then who, after hearing you wanted to accomplish the interview that very day, it was he who suggested that you could hand deliver the letter to the jail. I asked if I could hand deliver it. All right. And he agreed? Yes. And did he tell you to ask for him? Yes. That he would meet you? Correct. Did he tell you that he would personally take the letter to Mr. Avery? Yes. Do you remember about what time of day you were having this conversation on November 18th with Mr. Burns? It was in the morning. My guess is that it was around 10 o'clock in the morning. All right. Now I have the sign-in sheet. I'm happy to show it to you if you would like to see it. At least it looks like a fellow named Dave Duchan, Duchan, and Jennifer Kolbusz signing in the jail at 2:05 p.m. Mm-hmm. Does that sound about right? Yes. Okay. Some time seemed to have passed between the conversation with Mr. Burns and your arrival, obviously. Yes. More time than necessary to drive from the Green Bay area from where you were coming. Yes, I wasn't at work yet. I was calling on my own time from my apartment. All right. So did you talk to anyone at all at the jail or law enforcement between your conversation with Mr. Burns and arriving at the jail around 2 that day? No. Hand wrote a letter to Mr. Avery in the car. Yes. Asked for Mr. Burns at the receptionist window outside the jail. Yes. How long did it take him to come? About a minute. Again, as if he were nearby. I guess. Had you told him that what time to expect you? No. Had he said anything to you about, gee, you have to avoid this mealtime or shift change or any sort of restrictions like that? No. Did he tell you that you could come to any time at all? No. Were there any discussions at all about when you were coming that day? I said that I think I'm going to come today, but I have to go into work and discuss it with other members of our new staff. That's where you left it with Mr. Burns? Yes. So your understanding, at least, of his conversation with you was that only he had is that about 10 o'clock in the morning, he's told by a reporter on the telephone, she thinks she's coming today, but there's a contingency to that? Correct. He then disappears into the jail or somewhere with the letter you handed him? Yes. And Mr. Avery appears then in the company of some other uniformed members of Calumet County Sheriff's Department? Right. After we were led into that other room. Roughly how much time passed between when Burns leaves with your letters and Avery and the other deputies show up? 5 minutes. I understand that the letter was handwritten. You prepared it in the car. You didn't make a copy of the letter, obviously. No. It was on WFRV letterhead? No, it was just on a legal pad. Okay, but you explained that you were from WFRV. Yes, to Mr. Avery. And if I understood you on direct examination, you think you said in the letter something like, I have no intention of convicting you. Correct. I just want to hear your side of the story. Yes. So you were intending to be welcoming, correct? Yes. Intending to encourage Mr. Avery to speak freely? Yes. Presenting yourself as neutral? I was presenting myself as a reporter. Right. Without bias. That is, suggesting whether in words or effect that every story has two sides and, I would like to hear your side of it? Yes. The small talk in the interview room started with that kind of pattern as well, correct? Yes. Thank you for talking with us. We want you to hear your side of the story, that sort of thing. Yes, there was some other small talk that was intended by you to try to put Mr. Avery at ease. Both of us at ease. Sure. He seemed to be at ease when he sat down for the interview. Yes. Yes. Now, I think understood you, but you described two uniformed officer members of the sheriff's department. Were they immediately outside the doors to this interview room? I believe so. They were not in the room during the interview. No. Okay, but you could see them through the glass in the doors. Yes. Within a couple of feet of the doors. Yes. Now, the interview itself, you estimated about 30 minutes. Correct. Setting aside small talk, okay, introductions, and how are you today, that kind of thing, the substance of the interview concerned charges against Mr. Avery. Correct. Concerned Ms. Halbach and the allegations related to her. Yes. The camera was running during the entire substantive portion of the interview. Yes. So when you say interview lasted about 30 minutes, you would expect there would be, again, about 30 minutes of tape of that interview. There might have been a few more minutes than that because after we're done doing the interview, the photographer tries to get what we call cutaway shots, just wider shots of talking. I see. To sort of fill in for the visual. Correct. Presentation on the story? Yes. All right. Would small talk have been filmed or taped, whatever it is, it's probably digital image these days, but the camera had been on for the small talk portion of this, some of it. The story itself then ran that evening? Correct. It was shorter than 30 minutes? Correct. Do you know how long that story was as ran on air? I believe it was slightly over 2 minutes. Probably ran at 5 and at 6 and at 10 or that kind of thing on the broadcast. Parts of it ran at 5 and 6, and then the longer version, which was more than 2 minutes, ran at 10 o'clock. How long was the longer version? At 10 o'clock, it was almost a little over 2 minutes. And at 5 and 6, a little bit under 2 minutes? Correct. You've edited the 30 minutes roughly a file of that you had. I didn't personally edit it, but I logged it and I selected the pieces of it that would be used. And my clumsiness, that's really what I meant. You made the selection. Correct. Of what the snippets or segments of that interview were to use in your story. Correct. And then you wrote some text to fill in and make it flow into the story. Yes. Somebody else actually did the clipping or editing. Correct. All right. But the design then was to render about 30 minutes down into about 2 minutes of good newscast material. Well, just to tell what happened during the interview. Right. And something that would be interesting to the viewers, right? Provided that it was accurate representation of what happened. Well, sure, I mean, I guess to assume the camera takes down accurately what's being said and done, correct? Correct. And you want to present it in a balanced story, true? Yes. An unbiased story, correct. But the accuracy of the actual film is not in the issue, correct? I'm sorry. The accuracy of the actual film isn't an issue, correct? No. There's a selection decision on how to present it, true? Yes. And you want it to be interesting? Yes. You want it to attract viewers rather than cause them to switch over to Fox 11, right? Well, it depends on what you mean by good and interesting. But the idea, yes, is to do a story that's fair and accurate, but at the same time not boring. Sure. And that's what I mean. Will help to cause someone to decide to watch Channel 5 rather than Channel 2 or Channel 26 or Channel 11, correct? That's not my primary motivation when I do a story, but I guess you could say that. Sure. I'm not suggesting that it's your primary motivation, but it's a consideration. Sure. Have you been asked to produce the balance of the roughly 30 minutes of film from November 18th? No. Are you willing to do that? I don't know or not if I would have to. I would just wait for direction from my supervisor. That is, in the scheme of things, you don't get to make that decision. I don't know. You don't know if you get to make the decision about whether or not the tape is released? I'm asking for all 30 minutes. What's your answer? Oh, I know. It's not my decision. Okay. After the November 18th interview ended, did you have any further communication or of any kind with Mr. Burns before December 14th? No. And what caused you simply to hop in the car on December 14th and drive to Chilton with a cameraman? There had been more developments in the case as there were weekly, and we just decided That a month had passed and it seemed like it was time to attempt to talk to Stephen Avery again. What recent developments caused this? I don't recall specifically what they were. I believe it was something to do with a small cabinet being found in his trailer. Okay, I can't recall specifically what, but something excited you or drew your attention at that time, and you said, let's go back and try and talk to him again. Right. All right. The two offices in which you work are physically in the city of Green Bay. Actually, I work out of the Fox Cities Bureau, which is in a Little Chute. All right. As does your cameraman? Yes. How long did it take for the two of you to drive from the office in Little Chute to the Calumet County Jail in Chilton? Probably about an hour, in each direction, obviously. Yes. All right. So, and you work roughly an 8-hour shift? Correct. You obviously have deadlines that you have to hit because 5 o'clock the newscast will be on air. Yes. If I understand you correctly, you had spoken to no one before grabbing a cameraman or asking the cameraman to accompany you and taking a 1-hour car trip to Chilton. Spoken to nobody at the Calumet County Jail. Correct. Hadn't spoken to Mr. Avery. No. And as far as you know, Mr. Avery hadn't tried to contact you after November 18th, 2005. Correct. If you got to the jail and they said, sorry, we're not letting you in, you're facing the risk of wasted 2 hours of your time and 2 hours of the cameraman's time, correct? Yes. You arrived at the jail at 3 o'clock, 3:40ish, something like that in the afternoon? That's likely. So if you got turned around right away, you would be back at 4:40 or something like that. True? Yes. 20 minutes before 5 o'clock newscast. Yes. Empty-handed. Yes. We took a drive to Chilton today. Wouldn't make much of a story. It happens more than you think. Okay, so you arrived and you did see Mr. Burns immediately. Yes, I did. He appeared quickly? Yes. Did he ask you why you were there? Well, I spoke first and said that I would like him to deliver this letter to Stephen Avery. And then we have been through that. What happened, correct? Yes. Here again, about 30-minute interview? Yes. About 2 minutes, give or take, gets aired in the story later that evening. Correct. The story only aired at 10 o'clock, though. We did not do anything at 5 or 6. All right. Did the raw footage, the 30 minutes approximately of either the November 18th or December 14th ever get posted on or made available on the public on the WFBR.com? No. When you came into the jail on December 14th, did any of the jail staff, anybody in a uniform, working there, whether it was Mr. Burns or anyone else, say anything to you at all about the schedule, for instance, for meals? No. Say anything to you at all about the shift changes and schedules? No. Put at any time limit on how long you could be with Mr. Avery? No. Put any other limitations on what sort of resources you'd be drawing from the jail? No. Were there, again, 2 uniformed deputies posted outside the 2 doors of this interview room? I believe so. As far as you know, did they remain there for the entire course of roughly 30-minute interview? As far as I know. Again, as on November 18, setting aside a small talk about Christmas or food or family, the substance of this interview was about the criminal allegations against Mr. Avery pending in Manitowoc County. Yes. It was about nothing else? Correct. You explained to Mr. Fallon that, well, for starters, you never actually said to Mr. Avery, we're going to broadcast this interview. Correct. But you did carry a microphone and identifying yourself as a reporter and with a cameraman and all that sort of equipment, right? Yes. Saying you were from WFRV-TV. Correct. And you took it as implied, and obviously implied, that some portion of the interview at least would be broadcast. Yes. Was it also implied to Mr. Burns in the same way that you would be interviewing Mr. Avery about the pending criminal allegations? Yes. Were you asked, or to your knowledge, was anyone else at WFRV asked to provide either a CD or DVD of your November 18, 2005 interview of Mr. Avery to law enforcement or to other Calumet County District Attorney's Office? I was never asked, and I don't know of anyone else who was. All right, do you have any idea how the Calumet County District Attorney's Office would have obtained what's described as a CD of that Avery jail interview on November 18, 2005 to then produce to the defense? No. Attorney Strang, I think that's all I have. Thank you. The court, any redirect? Attorney Fallon, I have no redirect for this witness. She may be excused. All right, you're excused. Attorney Fallon, I do have two requests of the court. I would ask the court to take judicial notice of the fact that the criminal complaint, in this case, charging Mr. Avery with first-degree intentional homicide, was filed, I believe, on November 15, 2005. I would further ask the court to take judicial notice of the fact that the preliminary examination, in this case, occurred on or about December 6, 2005. Attorney Strang, I think it's appropriate for the court to take judicial notice of anything on the docket or in the court files on this case. And indeed, as we proceed further into further briefing or argument of this, I also ask the court to take notice of, certain dates, for example, when the original complaint was filed. The court, all right, the court will do so. We've got one more witness on this issue. Attorney Fallon, that's correct. We're going to defer the defense to call that witness. We're going to rest our presentation of evidence. The court. All right, I'm going to take a 10-minute break at this time, and then we will come back at that time and hear that witness. Recess taken.